But instead of falling in love with like the process of becoming the person that I wanted to be, I fell in love with like this idealistic vision or this future. And so I think the way that showed up or manifested itself was unintentionally, like I skipped steps. Like I was trying to cross the canyon and get to the other side without actually having to do all do the actual real dirty work. Like, and I don't say like I didn't work hard, because like I beat my brains out, and it's part of the reason why I got as sick as I got in 2020 was, I destroyed my physical body, like working to the level I was, but I was chasing something that wasn't really fully attainable.
Okay, so today what we're going to do is just going to do a small riff on something that I wrote as I was reflecting on a lot of different things, but the most important was recently this week we came out with a corporate purpose. And so, for us, Securo Brands is the parent company that owns a lot of the product brands that we bring to the consumer. So between Modern Needs, Vanish, Pain Safari, soon to be Prevail, as well as the Patriot on Purpose podcast, that all sits underneath Securo Brands. And the why of what we do things is something that we had never really crystallized. I know that you were instrumental in helping us push this forward, but if we had asked people like, why do we do what we do, they wouldn't really have been able to come up with a concise one sentence statement. And so we did that just this week, launched it on Valentine's Day of all days, which is kind of interesting because the why behind our products and the way that we are focused corporately, it goes as follows. It says, to love and be loved brings the greatest joy in life. And so we at Securo Brands endeavor to make the highest quality products in order to protect the bonds of love that you share with people you can't imagine living without. And so what that really means is customers are going to buy our products because they help protect those bonds of friendship. And then, of course, we are involved in this business to protect the bonds of friendship that we share with our family, we share with the people in our business, as well as that we can extend to our customers. So, I think that's a really important thing for a company to stand behind. And we're going to do a lot of things with this guiding purpose of love being the motivator. And of course, like you and I both share beliefs as Christians that God is love and that we are meant to love others. We are meant to love God. And if we're not acting in accord with those principles or that guiding North Star, then, a lot of bad things can happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, just having a certain level of intentionality about, life, whether we're talking about, the company that we have and the brands that we're creating and inside of that, the products and like the intentionality between all of that. It's like, why are we doing this? Well, it's the same can be said for anything else that, has to do with life. Like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? When we have children, like, okay, well, I mean, it might sound weird to ask questions like, why are we having children? But it's like, what? So you're not going to have a child. Like, well, what are you going to teach that child? Like, who are you going to be? Like, what's the purpose of like, your life? Like, what's the purpose of your family? Like, so I think in general, there's just a different level of intentionality that like we can be all approaching life with, including our microphone setups.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, being intentional is so important, and the fundamental of any behavior really needs to be analyzed, because most people don't think critically or introspectively about why they do what they do. They just kind of go through the motions of life. And I think that when we talk about a patriot on purpose, like, yeah, sure, the patriotic aspect is an important thing, but the on purpose part is even more important. Like, what is it, again, fundamentally that drives you to do what you do? And I remember when I was thinking about this why, I kept thinking about when my son was born. He's 6 now. And, the first time any dad holds their kid, hopefully any dad, most dads, they just look at that creation and they think to themselves, I would do anything to protect this child. And you realize that there's inherent value in this person that you're holding, and they're so weak, so defenseless, and that just causes you to love them even more, because you realize, like, without me or without anybody to help this child, they would perish. And the thought of that is abhorrent. And of course, like that's a totally different topic for another day. But this is what I just wrote this thing this morning, and it was on the idea between status, respect, and love, and navigating the path to fulfillment. So what I'll do is I'll just read. I wrote it into 3 pieces, and I'll read the first one, and then we can just dialogue about it. And I hope that people understand that this is as much a thought experiment as it is kind of a treatise, or I don't even know how you treatise, whatever. Okay, all the English scholars can correct me on that, but like a treatise on what is most important. Again, like it's love. So there's a couple things that we're going to talk about: status and respect. A lot of people think those are more important than anything else, and turns out, in my opinion, and I think that you could probably validate this by looking at social studies of people who pursue respect and status over the bonds of relationships that are formed around love, that they end up being much more depressed throughout their life. So here, I'll just read it. So status, what is it and why does it matter, and why won't it solve your problems? A simple definition is status is defined as one's position or rank compared to others in society. It's often associated with success, privilege, and power. It's something we all crave because we see the utility in achieving higher degrees of status because it can open doors to opportunities, facilitate networking, and provide a platform for influence. In this sense, status can be a helpful tool for progressing through life, enabling us to achieve goals that might otherwise be out of reach. Yet, people confuse the attainment of status as a means to realizing contentment and peace. In fact, the pursuit of status for its own sake can be a hollow endeavor. True fulfillment stems not from the external validation that status can provide, but from internal satisfaction and contentment with one's life choices and achievements. History and literature are replete with examples of individuals who achieved great status yet lacked fulfillment. This disconnect underscores that while status can be a means to an end, it is not an essential ingredient for a fulfilled life.
So what do you think about that?
I think about how when you build a business and how you move through the business world, if you will, like it's a lot of jockeying for the alpha male position, right? Like everybody, especially as you go into like the C level or something like that, everybody's just kind of looking at others and comparing themselves against them. Like, oh, so and so is doing this, and here I am down here. Like, I feel a little bit less than that other person. And then of course, as you begin to become a little bit more successful, like sometimes that can feed your ego, and all of a sudden you think that because you've cleared a couple different hurdles in your life, you've overcome these obstacles, you've reached a certain threshold of achievement, that means you're that you're better than people who haven't. Now, I'm not saying that is true for everybody. I am saying that like at points in time in my life, for fleeting moments, I've thought that. I've had to like rebuke those thoughts because again, like this is something that I've thought about a lot. You know, when I was younger, I really wanted to be a popular person. Everybody wants to be popular in high school. And then I graduated high school as not one of the most popular people. I was involved heavily in the snowboarding scene when I lived in Salt Lake City. And for those who don't know, Salt Lake City is to the snowboarding scene what Hollywood is to acting. Like everybody was there. And so I was rubbing shoulders with all the most like influential people in the industry at that time. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is just another thing where people are jockeying for status because, you know, you tend to get a lot personal satisfaction because you're at a certain level of status, or you actually get things. You know, people always are willing to give things to people because they have a certain status, because, you know, there's a quid pro quo there. They're like, hey, if I give you this, then your status is actually going to help me in some way. So that kind of reciprocity. And then you just realize after a while, like, especially once you, maybe not everybody, but what I realize is like, none of that really matters. The only thing that matters are the people in front of me and how I treat them and how I love them well. And status, you know, for one, my wife doesn't care about my status in this company. Like, we could be a $10 billion company and I could be one of the most famous people on the planet and she would not care at all. Not one bit. And that's really cool. And in a sense, it's like, well, why would I continue chasing that? Like, if it happens that those things, you know, if those are results of like the good work that we do, the value that we provide, people end up saying, oh, we want to hear what you have to say on the subject because you've done that, you've been there. But like to pursue it for like the thought that, oh, well, my wife is going to appreciate me more. She's going to look up to me in a different way. Like, sure, she appreciates the fact that I am doing those things, but she appreciates the hard work far less than the status that would come with it. And again, like I just see so many people getting wrapped up around their status, and it's not a good look, and it's not a good thing to focus on because ultimately it's fleeting, and when you die, like you take nothing with it.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to like process through some of the thoughts that I have as it relates to this. I mean, I think, from a place to operate from and build from, if you're doing something purely for the standpoint of getting status, I think you're missing, a lot of the things that like you really can get fulfillment from. I think it's one of those things that's funny. I think in Kings in the Bible it talks about Solomon, and how Solomon, I imagine Solomon probably wouldn't have minded being really, really wealthy. If someone was to ask him that question, but like when he went to God and what he asked for specifically was wisdom, and the attainment of wisdom ultimately, did lead to him, being one of the wealthiest kings, like I think, ever. So when I think about like, just like, contextually or where somebody's like, building from, like what's the foundation? Like if you're trying to do something just for status or just for respect, like you're going to do things that you might not do otherwise, like on the way to those goals, that when you get to them, and maybe this is why, like, and I'm not gonna say it's in every situation because it's not true, but in enough situations, with some of the founders that I know that have sold companies, they end up being depressed after they sell their company, or after, after an event like that, or maybe it's not necessarily exactly depressed, maybe it's a loss of meaning, or like, they feel like they have lost like a loved one. And I think a lot of that goes back to like a sense of purpose. I think we're wired to have a sense of purpose. We're meant to be in community. I think respect and status is something that can be a byproduct of doing those things well, of leading well and supporting and existing like in a situation with other people where like you do build a company, or you build anything, whether it's a company or it's a mission or it's a cause. But just kind of going back to that, respect, status. Like again, I think it's like I think you get into to murky waters when you're doing something just purely for that.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that I'm focusing on when I talk about status. It's kind of a cautionary tale, right? Like if your main goal is to put yourself in the limelight increasingly, and like that's what you're shooting for, then you'll find that when you do achieve one level of status, it's a moving goalpost. So all of a sudden, like that wasn't enough. Now I need to be even higher. Status certainly serves a purpose. One, status is, again, it's a result. It's saying many times it's a result. I mean, you could be born into something that gives you automatic status, but if you've earned a certain level of status through hard work, that's a signal that, oh, this guy is efficient, or he's strong, or any of these other superlatives that you could give a person. But at the same time, like it can be one of those self-absorbed types of pursuits where you're like, oh, I'm just going to do this to make it all about me. And of course, like one of the things that we know being believers is that like pride was the thing that caused Satan to fall, right? Like he believed he was more beautiful than God and he wanted the worship. And that's kind of what status does. So especially when it becomes a singular pursuit or it's like the driving force. Now, I think that status, like if you want to go from it with a biological or a evolutionary mindset, like status in the in-group is really helpful because it helps to form hierarchies inside of communities and tribes. So like you need status. Like you can't get away from it, right? Like even inside of a company, like you've got the CEO, then you've got whatever is beneath the CEO, and then you've got whatever is beneath there. So like as companies grow, status is like it's bolstered in certain parts, and then people need to have a certain level of status, or in this instance, authority, so that others will listen to them. But it's I think when you get wrapped up in status and think about it in the sense of identity, like I am this and I have this level of status, so this is actually who I am, whereas the status is simply a byproduct of your hard work or your belief, then it's okay. But like it's just like you can run into murky waters when status and the seeking of status is a big thing. And part of this is even just going to, like, as we're growing this podcast, one of the things that we know and we've heard is like, hey, to get a podcast going, you need to have a certain level of status so that other people are going to come onto your show, which can be like, it's obviously true. Everybody wants to be on the show of the next person who has a certain level of appeal or status and popularity. But what if all of a sudden, like, we just get into this warped pursuit of growing the biggest podcast and having our personal brand wrapped up in that? Then all of a sudden, like, we've lost the plot. Like, we won't be doing Patriot on purpose to deliver the truth anymore. We will be doing it to just get the best guests, or to just, make it all about us. And so this is why I really wrote on it, because like when you get back to the Securo why, like our company's why, it's like love and friendship, and those bonds are far more important than us seeking after our own self-actualization or self-realization that like is oftentimes right there. Like it's that sin crouching at the door, as they say in the Bible. Like, so that's why I just, I'm always thinking about it, because it's like, what happens if I kind of like the dark side of the force? Like, what happens if you give into anger and hate and all that, and then you turn to the dark side? It's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm freaking Darth Maul and I didn't mean to, or whatever. I don't pay attention to Star Wars anymore. Sorry, geeks. No hate. I loved it for a long time, but now Jar Jar Binks ruined it for me. I've never recovered.
It did go in an interesting direction when that character came in. That's for sure. Man, yeah, I'm still thinking about like the status, and like you kind of mentioned like titles and companies and things like that. And there's like there's like status that's given based on like a title, and then there's like status that's like earned based on like.
So that gets into my respect part when we get to there.
Yeah,
because I think those two things can be conflated, and not necessarily like, yeah, you earn status, but when we get to respect, I'll kind of link them together.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't know I was going to drop this bomb on you.
No, it's good.
Yeah, Friday happy hour.
No, this is good, man.
Adding levity to the situation, and again, like I want people to understand that. This is not unique to anything. Like part of the impetus for this is I was listening to this guy on Rogan the other day talking about this. Like that's what he does his research on, and how he does that research on that, and then cults. And so a lot of the times, like cult leaders are able to exact a certain measure of influence over their whatever proselyte, like disciples. I don't know what you call people who are in a cult. And it's because of the status they have inside of the cult. And of course, like that feeds their ego. Like they're like, I'm God. Like I already said I was, didn't really believe it. Now people believe it, so do I. And I feel like that's the slippery slope that pursuit of status can present.
Well, so the ego thing is an interesting thing to bring up. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think ego. First off, I'll say egos aren't good or bad. I think egos are necessary for a lot of reasons. I think we've all got them, and I think, and depending on, the situation you're in, like how your ego exists can be different from one situation to another. But what I can tell you, and, just from my experiences, if there's one thing that I have seen derail more companies, more projects, more relationships, like it is absolutely ego. I was listening to a podcast like years ago. They were talking about like, the acceleration of like the human experience, and this was being spoken about more like in a war context, and like how, when bullets start flying, people, you start really seeing who people really are. in those moments. And I think it's a harder thing for someone, who's not in those enhanced, super kinetic environments to experience things like that. But I think in business where, millions of dollars are at play, like I think the equivalent of bullets could be money, or it could be egos. But egos are, I think in business we see, the ego at an accelerated, kind of enhanced experience.
Yeah.
And it can be really, really good. Like, I mean, some people, have their egos in check, which enables them to not just be heard themselves, but to listen and to be able to work in these environments with people where, they can get the best out of others. Like they can, build relationships and create environments of trust and vulnerability, which are important, whether we're talking about like a home environment or a work environment. But man, egos when they go out of, when they're unchecked, like when they get out of balance, that's when things can get pretty gnarly. So I don't know exactly how that ties into status and to respect and fulfillment, but that's, ego is just something that kind of, as you mentioned a second ago, I thought was relevant to kind of talk around that a little bit.
Well, I think what you can kind of tie this to is if they are doing surveys of younger people, which is funny for me to say because I still feel like I'm young, but when they talk to high schoolers and they're like, high schoolers, middle schoolers, what would you want to do if you were able to do anything as a career? I want to be a YouTube star. Well, like, what's the underlying motive behind that? Now, of course, like, they're children. They don't have fully formed brains, but you could argue that some people never fully form their brain. But the reason they do that is because of like the status. They want people to see them. They want to be adored. They want to be idolized. They believe that that's the pathway to fulfillment and happiness. And so that's something that we carry forward in our lives from a very young age. And, I think that I didn't really grow out of that until I got married, to be completely honest. Like, part of the reason for that is like I wanted status so that I could attract a spouse. Like, I thought that was probably the fastest way to do that. Because, of course, it's like the whole thing that everybody says about Tinder, which I used for all of like 8 hours one time back in 2013 before I got married. You've got like 5% of the males connecting, like matching with like most of the women, and the rest of the dudes are incels. And then, of course, and that's a problem. So like men are always going to be attracted to trying to maintain status, and women are for not necessarily opposing reasons, like just different reasons altogether. And then that just feeds the ego. Like, as you are, like, then it becomes about you and the super ego, and other people aren't allowed into your orbit as much because like, you're so consumed with how you can make things work for yourself. Part of the reason I even putting this out here today is like I want to put out there in the public like that I want to be held to a different standard as a business owner. Like, I hope that, like if there was ever a Glassdoor.com review of the company, and it's about like the CEO, or like in my case, the chief brand officer, and they're like reviewing the C-suite and the E-team, and they're like, no, everybody there is awesome. They care so much about the people that they work with. And then like what you've done is like it's not so much that it's not about status, but all of a sudden like you've shirked the call to building status over like making sure that people felt cared for, because you've got those companies where, like, we can just use Elon Musk as an example. I doubt many people think that Elon Musk is a really nice guy and they like him and they feel like he cares for them. Of course, he's running huge companies, but he has the status of the wealthiest person in the world. Most of the people who are some of the wealthiest people in the world, candidly, like if you look at like the people who are close to them, don't think that they're great people. And of course, like, why, they ended up as the richest person or the richest people in the world for a couple different reasons, but I'm sure that like the status signal certainly played a role in that. They're like, hey, I'm eclipsing $10 billion. I could be the richest person in the world. Just keep shooting for that type thing, that goal. So yeah, there's a lot here. So I think let's just roll to respect, because do you mind
if I riff on one thing real quick?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about, again, and this is when you fall in love with an end result, like having status or, getting something that like, that's out there that you're like, ooh, like, when I get that, like, I'll have arrived. I'll be happy. Like, this end result thing, whatever it is, it could be status. It could be being a millionaire. It could be, having this car. It could be, having multiple companies, like having the respect of your peers, like proving people wrong, whatever it is. Like, I think back earlier in my career, in the entrepreneurial space and being inside of startups, like one of the things that so I look back on that time period, like I definitely like fell in love with and coveted or, desperately wanted to just be respected or to have like this reputation or to have this thing and to be perceived a specific way. And like, I think one of the ways that manifested itself was like, I didn't I didn't do anything unethical, but instead of falling in love with like the process of becoming the person that I wanted to be, I fell in love with like this idealistic vision or this future. And so I think the way that showed up or manifested itself was unintentionally, like I skipped steps. Mm-hmm. Like I was trying to cross the canyon and get to the other side without actually having to do all the actual real dirty work. Like, and I don't say like I didn't work hard because like I beat my brains out, and it's part of the reason why I got as sick as I got in 2020 was, I destroyed my physical body, like working to the level I was, but I was chasing something that wasn't really fully attainable. And I also was missing things. I was missing critical pieces that were enabling to me to really be fulfilled, like in the process. And I think that's where when people fall in love with that end result, that status piece, they'll end up doing things that either aren't actually truly in service of what's really underlying, what they really want to achieve, or, what they think they want to achieve. But that was just something else that was like, man, as you were thinking about, I was thinking about that, man, like that status thing is a slippery slope. Like if that's the real goal.
Yeah, the thing that I wrote about status being tied to power and influence, I think that's the reason that most people chase it. Because if they can achieve a certain level of status, then that means they can exert influence, or if they have enough power, they don't even have to exert influence. They can literally just force people to do things that they want at the drop of a hat. So that's where it's like, this is why people chase it, and this is why probably I think you could put status and pride on the same playing field, or like the same kind of definition. So with respect, I wrote this: respect, unlike status, cannot be acquired through wealth, power, or position. It is earned through actions that reflect integrity, empathy, and competence. Respect is given to us by others based on the quality of our interactions with them. They give us respect when they see how we handle challenges and a refusal to waver from our principles and values. It is a reflection of character rather than circumstance. Earning respect is a process that requires time, consistency, and authenticity. It is built on the foundation of how we treat others, including those who can do nothing for us in return. Respect earned in such a manner is far from enduring and fulfilling than any level of status achieved. It's far more enduring, and it fosters genuine connections and mutual understanding which are integral to a meaningful life. But respect is not enough. So this is when you were saying, like, earning status. I think that you can certainly earn status, but you can't. You have to earn respect. Like, you can just get status. Like, all of a sudden, you can just be promoted for no good reason. Nepotism is a really good way to achieve status, but, like, we know how that goes most of the time. Or, again, like, you're born into it. You're just hot for no reason, and everybody's like, oh, my gosh, you're hot. And it's like, well, you didn't earn that. You just came out of the birth canal looking that way, so good for you. But respect, that's totally different. So if you have a certain level of status, and then, again, like a commensurate amount of respect that would be deserved of that level of status, that's a really good place to be. Like, if you're the president and people respect you, that's great. Because it's like, well, now, like, you can get a lot of things done. And, there haven't been many presidents lately who have both status and respect. I mean, you could argue that Trump did to an extent, Barack Obama did. But, like, I would say that, no, it's been a long time since at least, like, both sides of the aisle were looking at a president and saying, yeah, he's got the status and he's got my respect. I might not agree with him on everything, but at least I respect the man. And so this also goes into business, right? So like you could be, well, you are the president of the company. Like, does every like so there's the status. Like, what's the respect like? Like,
Sure.
have you earned it? And I think that's yeah,
Yeah, to me, like, titles really mean. I don't mean this completely, but it's like, on one hand, to me, titles mean nothing. Like, to me, it's like, when I came and evaluated whether I wanted to come and partner with you guys or not, like, I wasn't like, oh man, like, I want that president title really bad. Like, because to me, I've helped start and run enough companies to where, and I say that like there's a balance to everything, right? The title is helpful from the standpoint of like, people need to know how to hold anybody accountable. So like, as it relates to that, the office or the role of president or CEO or chief brand officer or, chief technology officer, like, there's expectations that come along with that title and holding, that and responsibilities. And so, I think it's helpful to like, those titles are helpful from that standpoint. So like, how to measure somebody and are they holding up their end of the agreement? So like I don't know, when I think of titles, like that's the first thing that comes to mind. Now the respect piece. So when I came into the company, like, I came in with a certain reputation, based on previous success. But if I'd come in and, done a lot of things and, stepped on people's egos and I was out of control, like, and, was, not listening to people and telling them exactly how, I think every single little thing needs to be done. Like, I wouldn't earn a lot of respect or leadership capital, like, by acting like that. So it's like, I could come in and the position of president may garner a certain level of respect or people listening to the person sitting in that seat just based off the fact, that like it comes with that role. But like, there is a point though where, if you do not do the things you just talked about a minute ago, when you're reading that off, like consistently and, in a certain way, like people are going to stop listening to you. Like you won't have respect. You might have the status of the role, but that's about it.
right. And that's what I was thinking too. Is like status when it comes to influence and power, you can get a lot of things done, but it's generally through violence. Whereas respect, man, if you have respect and well, you don't even need the status. If you have the respect, like we can think of like a military analogy, right? Obviously, a general has a lot of or has status and typically tends to have some respect or a medium amount of respect. But if you were engaged in some kind of conflict, whether it doesn't really matter how big it is, but let's just say it's smaller because this is where this example makes more sense. You could be a lowly private, and if you had the respect of a lot of other people, even like a captain or something like that, and I'm not in the military, so or never was, but I can see this playing out. Like you're pinned down under heavy fire, and all of a sudden, like maybe the captain gets injured or something, and then nobody else is stepping up, but this private steps up that everybody respects greatly because of how he's carried himself, and he's making decisive action. People are going to follow him naturally because they're like, I respect this guy. He's one, like he's stepping up, like he's actually not usurping a role of status. I mean, in a sense, he is because like there's nobody there, but he's not taking it. It's just like he's moving into a position of status by making these decisions, and then the respect that he has is going to allow him to operate in a way that wouldn't otherwise happen. Now, that example probably doesn't happen too often, but I'm sure it has happened often enough.
No, I mean, well, I would say, from having gotten to have some visibility into how team guys operate in the way that they train, those war fighters to think and to operate. It's, where there's a decentralized command component like that, where, there is somebody that can, in any given moment, step up and make a call. And like,
Right.
and you're right. Like if they have a track record of success or there's a level of trust there and respect, like if somebody who may not necessarily be like the officer in that particular situation, maybe that officer doesn't have a good vantage point, but this other person does, and they make a call, like the rest of the unit is gonna, the rest of the team is gonna listen to them, and that's how those guys, have that high level of success. So it's one of the reasons why they have the high level of success that they have.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it a little bit more, the military is a perfect example of where respect and status don't often come together. Where like a person has status but no respect. I tend to read tons of novels around the military, most of them nonfiction, and there's so many times where like so and so is an officer and they're trying to get something done, and the men hate that guy. Like
Yeah.
they hate him so
Yeah.
much. They don't
Yeah.
respect him. Whereas then you've got the other guy who is like another officer that is respected, and people would die for him. Like they would do absolutely anything. And you just look at like why does respect matter? Well, I think respect matters for a couple different reasons. One, it just is like a mirror of your integrity. So if people respect you, that probably means that you're living life in a way that is worth being lived. I mean, people tend to respect people they don't know for various reasons, but like when it comes to like interpersonal relationships, like if you're not respected, that's a pretty big red flag that you're doing a bunch of things wrong. So that's like why I think it's the most important thing is like you are living a life worth living, and it's not about getting what you want, but then of course like in the business setting, in a military setting, or anything like that, if you've got the respect of your employees or the people who are on a parallel path with you inside of the business, like that's a really good sign that you're living authentically, that you're acting ethically and with integrity, and it means that like you're going to get the things that you need done from the people that you work with, and likewise they're going to get the same thing because like they respect you. Well, you probably respect them as well, like because if you're living in integrity, that means that you have an inverse relationship where you're like living to respect those people, like you're treating them well. I mean, hopefully, like this is again like part of our why. It's like you're loving them well. So that's where respect is certainly helpful. But it's kind of interesting. Like I don't think that the word respect is in the Bible that much. But the next word is in it a lot.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to think
It's
about
there.
that.
I mean,
But
like if
it's
you look at the Ten Commandments, it's like honor your parents, children honor your parents. It's not respect, but I think you could probably make an argument that that's the
sure.
same word. But it doesn't say
Man,
respect the Lord your God.
but honoring, I don't know. There's a distinction though. I mean, honoring somebody is, I think, very different than respecting them. Because I mean, when I think about honoring my parents, like I think about like there's just a certain level of like. Well, I guess it depends, right? I guess it depends on how you look at your parents. But like, let's just say like if I really think about honoring somebody, oh man, I guess it really can mean the same. But like what I was thinking was, like there's people that like I'll respect, like just because of like their role in society or like something that they're doing. I'm like, yeah, like okay, cool. Like there's so like I'm trying to weigh this one out. Like if where I even go, this even makes any, if it actually works. But there was just something there for me where like between honor and respect, like there's just some people that like, yeah, like you're going to respect, they deserve respect based on the thing that they're doing. And then there's other people that like, but from the biblical context, like we'll go with yours so we can kind of delete all of what I just said. Because
Well, here's one. This is really interesting. So, going through Simon Sinek's book about the why, he constantly references Martin Luther King Jr. I think
okay,
it would be hard to argue that people don't respect him. I mean, for what he did, for his commitment to nonviolence, for a bunch of things like that. But I learned when not that long ago that Martin Luther King Jr. was having affairs. He had multiple affairs against like on his wife. So cheated on his wife a bunch, engaged in a bunch of orgies, all kinds of stuff. So I respect him in a sense, like because in many compartments of his life he lived with integrity. He did a lot of cool things, but like now at this point I'm like I'm not going to give that. I'm not going to honor Martin Luther King Jr. in the same way that I did not that long ago, like when I thought he was a better person than he was. Now, again, like I understand everybody sins, like everybody falls short. So I'm not saying like, oh, well, he needed to be perfect, but making that delineation is important because like you can respect your parents because of their parental role and what you know about them, but maybe fail to honor them because you don't always listen to them.
yeah, no, the Martin Luther King Jr. thing. I mean, there's a distinction there to be made, right? Like what he did, like, as far as like respecting and appreciating like what he did for society is very different than, saying I'm going to model my marriage after Martin Luther King
Sure.
Jr., right? I mean, it's like,
Yep.
is he the absolute example of like the right way to go about peacefully, representing a very, very important cause where you're trying to create change in a culture that like where there's lots of resistance and there's hate and there's adversary after adversary. Like, there's not very many that are going to be better. But yeah, like, like I'm definitely, if a book on, marriage comes out and it's, from, something, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. like wrote like in an earlier part of his life, like, and gets published, probably not gonna read that the same way that I'm gonna read him from a historical context.
Yeah. All right, I'm marking this clip right here. So for whoever comes in, you have a fly, don't you?
Dude, Mindy's been fixing my door on my ops past couple days, and I can sort it out though. Give me a second.
David got back to us, by the way. So cool. He says
Cool.
very bare bones. It didn't look like he just said we should change some things. Didn't look like we should insert anything. Okay, I will mark. All right, marking this clip too, and we'll come back into it. I don't even remember where we were. Something about Martin Luther King Jr. and
We are just talking about,
a book that he wrote. Okay, we'll just jump to love. So marking. All right, yeah, I think that respect doesn't need to be talked about nearly as much. I just think that sometimes that people may, again, I've said conflate 2 times, so this is the 3rd time saying that they may conflate status and respect. But as I said, it's not the most important thing. It's love that makes the world go round. So let's talk about that. And the love was the 2nd tattoo that I ever got. So when I was super depressed, I realized that love really did make a difference. And here's what I wrote. So at the core of human existence is the need for love. Love transcends the boundaries of status and respect, touching the very essence of our being. It is the most potent force for transformation and growth, capable of bringing about profound changes in individuals and societies alike. Love in its various forms, romantic, familial, platonic, and self-love, nourishes the soul, providing a sense of belonging, purpose, and fulfillment that cannot be replicated by any amount of status or respect. Love is the ultimate expression of our humanity and inspires altruism, compassion, and the pursuit of a common good. The capacity to love and be loved in return is what often defines the most fulfilling moments and relationships in our lives. It is a reminder that at our core, connection and emotional intimacy are more valuable than any external achievement or recognition. Now, what I didn't write in here is that I believe that God and a relationship with God is going to teach us how to love other people better. So I wanted to keep this on the human level right now. I didn't need this to devolve into a sermon or any kind of lesson on theology because 1, I'm unqualified to do that. And 2, like this is again going back to why our business exists and how we're going to steward this mission of protecting the bonds of love that people share with friends and family.
No, I dig it, man. Yeah, I think there's so many things that are happening right now, like in our culture and in the world, that like are a reflection of the lack of love that people are experiencing with themselves and with the relationships that they have around them.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they love themselves too much. And again, that goes to status. And they don't love others well enough. I think the most difficult thing in life is to love other people. Like, in a marriage, it's very difficult to love your spouse because they're imperfect. They sin against you, you sin against them. Like there's animosity between the two of you. Like, and that's one of those things, like when you're in the early stages of a romantic relationship, you can't imagine that you would ever get mad at that person. And then 10 years in, you're like, wow, I'm mad at you sometimes more than I like you, which is saying more about yourself than the other person, honestly. We should be quick to forgive, but I think that love is one of those things, like going back to the example of holding my child, like that kid hadn't done anything for me at that point. and yet I loved him more than I could have ever imagined. And, this is why everybody is always freaking out about everything, because like they're feeling that like they're not loved, or they're feeling that love is being overcome by hate. And I think that that's part of the reason that there's this polarization in the United States, is because like the love has become a love of self more than it has become a love for other people. And of course, like this can get twisted too. A lot of the times people are like, this is actually kind of prescient, because like that Super Bowl commercial just came out, He Gets Us, and everybody's like, one side saying, hey, that's not who Jesus is, and the other is saying, exactly, like Jesus is exactly this kind of person. But one of the things that gets twisted about Jesus is that like they're like, well, he was very loving. Well, love means that you tell the truth to people. You don't hide the truth from them. So, like whenever anybody was healed, he was always like, hey, I healed you because I love you, but go and sin no more. Like, stop sinning. Quit doing these bad things. And that's an act of love. So that's also getting down to another rabbit trail. But I think again, love is the most important thing.
So this is definitely a rabbit trail, but I'm going to mention it anyway. I don't know what you saw, but like the posts that I saw on Facebook that had to do with that commercial was shockingly negative.
You mean the reaction towards the commercial?
Yes. Well, one was just like one, like how ridiculous it was and how that made no sense to pop up during a Super Bowl commercial. It was just interesting.
Have you seen the one that they remade? He Saves Us.
I don't know if I've seen that one or not.
Yeah, so like the He Saves Us one is maybe like so that these commercials have been out here before. Like the He Gets Us. This is not a new campaign.
Yeah, no, I've seen that one. I've seen those.
Yeah, so this He Saves Us is like showing people in various circumstances where they're actively sinning, and then saying He saves it. Oh no! It was like former gang member, former prostitute, former porn star, former this, former that, and it's always like He saves us. So, and that's the thing is like the one example that I can remember is like the woman's washing the feet on the He Gets Us of the girl in front of the Planned Parenthood Center. Okay, so like you just look at that and it seems like a good thing, but people often forget like Jesus. This is my favorite. Mark Driscoll posted it's like Jesus washed the feet of Judas and then sent him to hell the next day. So it's like you realize what you're saying here. So and why is that loving? Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing that like I heard is like Judas lived with Jesus for years and saw all the miracles and everything, and yet still made a decision to betray him. He deserved to go to hell. He made that choice. So, like Jesus was constantly saying like, hey, anytime you want, you can turn and repent. So all the time giving Judas the truth, and then that's the loving part, giving you the truth. And when you turn away from the truth, like that's not love gone awry. That's like self-centeredness and again, ego. That's status. Like the dude took 30 pieces of silver for what reason? That's it enriched him. Like he's the guy that betrayed Jesus, and so like you can go right back up to the status argument again. Like he was always trying to take money out of the treasury for what purpose? Probably status, probably ego, probably pride. So, and if he had loved Jesus, then he wouldn't have done that. Jesus wouldn't have died on a cross necessarily. I mean, if you want to, somebody else would have betrayed him. Somebody else would have got him up there. He did come to die, but
yeah, that was always predetermined, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying. I mean, I'm trying to think like what else would people have taken issue with that commercial though? I mean, I know you're watching a football game, like all of a sudden seeing images of like somebody washing somebody else's feet in these very specific chosen kind of like scenes or moments. I'm trying to think like what like. And I'm looking at it through the lens of, someone who is a believer. I do believe that Jesus died on the cross for our sins so that we could spend the rest of eternity, like, not separated from God, our creator. And I've always seen the foot washing thing as, like the ultimate act of service, right? So when Jesus, when at the end there, like, he washed all the feet of his disciples. And here he is. He's this guy who is, he's the leader. I mean, he literally is God in human form.
Yeah.
And here he is, hanging out with, there wasn't anything extraordinary about any of those guys. They were just regular people, like fishermen, and had different different occupations, and they made an extraordinary decision to follow him. But here he is getting down on his hands and knees and washing the dirt off of their feet, and he's hanging out with, with the Pharisees and the people that were the most critical of Jesus, like constantly questioned, him for spending time with. Like if it were to happen today, like it would be, I think about a restaurant that I went to when my wife was pregnant with our third, when we were living out in Oregon, and it was this hamburger joint that on Sundays did dragon mimosas. And we rolled up into that place, and I think it threw my wife off for half a second, because we didn't know it. We just thought it was a burger place, and then we see a bunch of guys up on stage like dancing and singing, and then in a split second we're like, whatever, like we're here to eat burgers, we're gonna hang out, but like that would have been Jesus's jam. Like he'd have been like in all of the different areas and categories like of life, like people living these different ways that they're living. Like he would have loved everybody. Like
Yeah.
now would he have participated in some of those things himself? Like, no, but like, would he have loved someone any less, or any more? Like, no, he would have loved everybody. He'd have been washing the feet of the business guy, the CEO, the rock star, the porn star, like, you name it. Like, so I don't know, when I watched that commercial, like, I think that's what I was looking at from, like, I don't know if I haven't really watched enough to really like have a marketer's opinion on it as far as like the execution of the ads itself. But, it was interesting, like how something that is truly was meant to be symbolic of love in the ultimate sense. And, there was just so many people that had like this very, very negative reaction to it.
Yeah, I think they saw that it was wishy-washy. Like, the he gets us. What is that really saying? If he loves us, then he died for us. And if he died for us, he's asking us to turn to him. So, like, you could get into the whole debate around, like, shouldn't have said something else, which is why the He Saves Us campaign really made a lot of sense. It's like, you used to live in this life of depravity. Jesus loved you enough to die for you. So that's why it's important. And, same thing like where you're at the burger place and the trannies are there. Excuse me, that's probably an offensive term, but would he love them? Yeah. Would he have greenlit what they're doing? Absolutely not. He would have told them to turn from their sins and to sin no more. So like that's one of the things that is important is like, sin is death. So all Jesus is ever saying is like, turn away from death. Come to me. I am the light of the world. I am love. I am life. And it's not like, it's not hippy dippy BS. This is going to cost you, but it's also going to save you. Like I am going to save you when you make a decision. And again, like this is why to live this way in our business, I think is going to cost us in a sense. The nature of the business we're in already is going to cost us because, we're in firearms and we're in weapons. And so we don't have the available advertising suite or they're at our disposal the same way a normal company would. And now we're going to kind of double down on these Christian ethics. And that's going to cost us customers. And then we're going to even go so far as to like acting loving and ethically, which is purely from a business standpoint, probably not the most savvy thing to do. Like we could just go out there and rip people off, or we could do like all these underhanded things to achieve success quicker. So, it'll cost us, but it'll actually end up being the better way forward. It'll be the loving way, which is more important to me anyways, because like if we were to attain status at the expense of others, then that was a bridge too far.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.